Hello, everyone. Today I'll be chatting with Margaret Straus, the granddaughter of the late, great Dr. Max Gerson and daughter of Charlotte Gerson. She's carrying forward 40 years of practice, teaching lectures, seminars, helping to transcript books into multiple languages. She is now the president of the Max Gerson Foundation. Thank you for joining us today, all the way from Italy and Florida. I give to you, Ms. Margaret
And
Strauss.
I often say to people, look, you can either see the Gerson therapy as 2 years of jail for crimes against your body, that over 20 years of crime, or you can see it as a spiritual journey. I prefer that. I prefer it as something to
Mhm.
spiritual in the sense of connection, as what you
Yes.
were saying, connection with the universe and realizing what's important in life and what isn't important. And I think that the best patients do come out with that, that their material interests and so on just dissolve, and they become more wanting to help others. They become more connected to nature and the earth. They love putting their hands in the soil and growing their own things if they're lucky enough to have a garden,
Yes.
and so on. So yes, absolutely. I feel this is the only way to try and stop this world from going down the pits as it's going. Unfortunately, yeah.
It is the equivalent of sort of going to an ashram where you block out the entire outside world and you're focused on your practice.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of the direction of where we as society are headed and how far away we're getting from that, what was it like to sort of grow up with this knowledge, with this awareness? You know, as
Well,
Charlotte, as mom, I presume at a very young age, you sort of knew that we were in this broken medical system and there's this war with the FDA and the politics of food. So,
oh yes, of course. But
yeah.
things were much, much worse then. Because in one sense they were better
Mhm.
insofar as my grandfather could practice. They were not prepared with all the opposition, in place and all the laws in place so that they could stop him. And they didn't stop him except after 46 when they did the Senate hearings, and they took away his hospital affiliation. He couldn't work with young doctors, he couldn't work with laboratories, and so on. Those were the kind of opposition things that they did then. But he had his practice, he had his patients and his practice, and there was one lab that worked with him. And even though he couldn't teach young doctors, he still had his patients. Nowadays, they've been had plenty of time to prepare and to stop people from doing those things in the United States. What was it like growing up? Yeah, well, as Howard says in his book, um, curing cancer, that was just what grandpa did, It was not, it was nothing special, And I realized, however, pretty soon that, I better keep my mouth shut because I wasn't really able to defend the position. And, I got a lot of very strange looks. Very interesting. When I was in college, I took a public speaking course, and one of the things one of the subjects you had to do was a eulogy. No,
Mm.
so I talked about my grandfather, and I must have been pretty. I never said it was my grandfather though, and I must have been very persuasive because they were all pretty, locked into it, to it all. And so, when I said, "Would your opinion change if I told you this was my grandfather?" Oh, that's but they did listen. I have to say. I remember those were still the days that people were talking about taking salt pills if you sweated a lot, and that sort of thing. You were losing salt because your sweat was salty and that sort of thing. I mean, it was, those were the days. Those were the days before the actual. I'm 72. Those are the days before the actual Surgeon General report against smoking. Um, you
Right.
know, meat and protein and so on was important. I mean, we're talking about the 50s.
Yeah.
The food groups were carbohydrates, protein, fats, and whatever. So it was very primitive, the way people thought about food, and it was different in that sense. Now it's like, when I moved to London, I did my last year of university in London. When I moved to London, there was one whole food shop. I had to travel
Travel.
halfway up and to get to it and so on. And they had my grandfather's book. And I said, wow, got my grandfather's book. You sell it? Yeah, but people want information they don't know. And I said, well, um, leave it with me. And I mean, I wasn't working in this field at all, but I was doing it for myself because I had to find, supplies. I had to explain things. So I stenciled off this little booklet called Vital Information for the UK Gerson Patient. And that had that had my telephone number on it, and so on. So of course the phone was ringing all day after that.
Yes.
But that helped. That helped. And then when the phone was ringing all day, my husband was beginning to get mad, and so so I decided to do seminars. Now, another thing that happened in between there was that I wrote an article about Gerson for a very large circulation health magazine
Okay.
called Here's Health. That was in the middle of the 70s, I think. And that was one of those things that went into homeopaths and naturopaths, waiting rooms. And so over the years, it remained. And I think I must have gotten 7 or 10,000 letters over the course of 10 years from that. And of course, then we were selling the book more, and then I was giving seminars and lecturing and so on. It all took it. And that's when, at the end of the 70s, somebody told Beata Bishop about me, and she came to see me. And I was the first person that she was in contact with. And when we had a long talk, and at the end of the talk, she said, "What a pity that there's not a clinic." And I said, "Well, there is, And she, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Well, you didn't ask."
Right.
And it's in Mexico. And so anyway, she went, and she became our most active,
Spokesperson.
grateful patient. She's amazing.
Yes. Yes.
Amazing. She's 95, and her mind is still absolutely intact, and her senses, her eyes
Yes.
and her ears. My mother couldn't hear very well at the end at all, but Beata, she still writes blogs.
I'm so proud to kind of follow in this work with them. Like you yourself are now a living legacy, and you're the granddaughter to Dr. Max Gerson. You're
No,
Charlotte's
I'm
daughter.
the only one of the family left who's.
I know,
So I
darling.
mean, I'm very awed by it.
What do you think that we as practitioners could do to kind of carry your namesake forward? We're torchbearers, essentially. We wear the Gerson practitioner label. What could we do for the efficacy of this medicine? Where do you hope the medicine's going?
My mother was very, very rigid about all the things in the
Yeah.
clinic, and in a way you had to be, because each doctor would come into the clinic, and one of them confided to me it took them 2 years, and he was really seeing patients every day, all the time, Gerson patients.
Hmm.
It took them 2 years to refine their reactions so they did not have the kind of knee-jerk reaction of a doctor, antibiotic, or
Yeah.
stop that, or so on, too many enemas, too many, that sort of thing.
Yes.
And she was there to keep. She was the Dr. Nash of the of the situation. um But I think that when you're dealing with patients on you're not in a clinical situation, that you have to be able to have some freedom if you know something's going to work or if you feel it's going to work, and you're keeping a constant eye on the patient. This is the bottom line is, does the patient get well? Do that,
Well,
because
rapport. The bottom line, I think, is rapport. And in this country, I can speak specifically here in
what are you
America,
talking about, Canada or the United States?
the United States.
Oh,
The United
you're,
States. I'm actually in Florida.
oh, you're,
Yeah. So I know that for a lot of patients, there's this idea of like we go to a doctor, the doctor in their white lab jacket tells us, this is what you need to do. And then we go home and do it. And there's no rapport, there's no conversation about what home life looks like, what the demands are. Sometimes it's, let's just say, a pharmaceutical prescription and then what the side effects might be and how it may impact them. It's just go do this and come back to me later and let me know whether or not it worked. And that's
right,
not how we work as Gerson practitioners. We want the conversation. We want to know how you're doing. There's a request for us to ask for vital diaries. So we get blood pressure, pulse, weight, temperature. And with that, I'm like, tell me how you're doing. Is it hard? Are you having trouble?
right.
What are your symptoms this week that you're dealing with? I want to know, because that
That's
helps me to understand better what I could be doing, what I can be recommending for that patient.
can
It
adjust.
really is like we kind of have to hold hands.
There are so many questions. In fact, I tell Alessandro, I tell him, look, get them to call me first.
Right.
If there's a purely medical problem that you need to address, I'll say, okay, that you have to ask Dr. Nicolosi. But 90%, I've always been following patients because it just hasn't been a certified doctor up until a few years ago. It's 35 years I've been working with the therapy. It isn't like,
Yes.
so I know, but I quite frankly would be hard pressed to tell you where the spleen was. So that,
Yeah. Yes.
so my mother's medical knowledge was good, but mine is not. So, well, there are people who say that I know more medicine than most doctors, but it's a whole different thing. If
It's
there's a particular symptom, I don't know what that is, that could be the disease itself doing something. I can't work that out. So
But
there
you
are,
understand the root cause of the disease, and in treating the root, those branches, those symptoms will dissipate as long as it's.
right. Well, I know what the symptoms are that relate to the therapy.
That's right.
Anything that's happening to them that I recognize as part of the therapy classic and so on, I can help them with.
Yes.
And I can always give them a pep talk. Often they'll call, and at the end we're joking and laughing. I say, how you feel? I feel better. I said, what changed?
Right.
Nothing.
And it does. It's part of the therapy, is to go through those emotional catharsis, and I think having people that you can relate to, having a network of other friends, family, even other patients, states across or countries across. Like, you need to have those people in your life to reinforce you're doing the right thing in those moments of weakness.
Kathleen Blake's support group is incredible in that sense. She had about 25,000 people in
Yes.
there, and she answers within 10 minutes of anybody at all times. I don't know how she does it on
Yes.
that day, and so that is a tremendous help, because a lot of the questions, I never step in unless I can see they're really going off track, and they got it. But she's got it really in hand, very, very.
Now, Kathleen also was a patient of the therapy, correct?
Yes,
Yes.
34 years ago, I think she
Yes.
had thyroid cancer.
It's amazing how revolutionary this therapy is, that it takes hold of individuals' lives and it
That's
really pushes them forward to be activists for
That's
the therapy. They start to understand the world in a different way. And once you have this knowledge, you can't step away from it. You can't back out of it and revert. Well, hopefully, you can't revert to the old ways. fast food
Well,
and
Beata puts it this way. She says that once you've been on the therapy, Dr. Gerson takes you by the scruff of the neck, doesn't let go. He just never lets go. And it's true.
well,
It's
it's that knowledge is power in a way, knowledge is grace, and being able to pass it forward responsibly to the people that you care for.
and you know something, uh, there are very few causes nowadays that are worth anything.
Yes.
Ideologies and everything, it's all a bunch of baloney, you know. And, the Democrats and the Republicans are the same. We have a Nazi fascist state of vaccinations
Yes.
and big pharma and so on. So there's not very much that's really worth fighting for anymore. And I think if you don't have something in life that drives you, it's pretty sad.
Well, passion is important. It's what
Exactly.
keeps you engaged to grow, to learn, to keep living. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah. So I think it's great. I mean, the number of people who are on the therapy and are doing well, and if somebody told me that if you took that thread from Gerson support to Gerson Therapy Support Group of everything positive we hear about healing, it says all the positive reports, positive things, and so on. If you ran that off, it'd be like 100 pages.
It would be.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Can you tell me what's happening with the Max Gerson Foundation? I know Howard was spearheading this, and I'm sorry for his loss this year. Um, I
Uh,
really feel like
it was such a
absolutely
shock.
unexpected, and
Yeah, that meant that he had not prepared anything, because if you're getting on and you're beginning to feel a bit this or a bit that, you say, I better get my affairs in order.
sure,
But he didn't at all. In fact, it's a nightmare trying to find, the contracts for the business, the books. Oh, there are
mm,
20 editions, there are 20 translations, and so on. So, and that's all um, inherited by his wife, who really was not in the business at
at
all.
all.
So we're really working very hard on that, and that's not the Max Gerson Foundation. The Max Gerson Foundation is very involved with China.
Yes. Okay.
So one of the driving forces is Molly Yang, and she is a lawyer trained in Texas, but she's Chinese, and she lived half of the year in China and half in the U.S., and she's
Okay.
now moving back to China, and they're building a clinic near Mongolia. You probably know where that is more than I do.
That's okay. Yes.
Okay, and a lot of support from local authorities and so on. And they also have a business group where they sell equipment and things they're doing that. And she has invited several times Anna Maria Aliano to China, who gave some excellent home setup training courses.
Right.
Uh, so they now have maybe 15 or more home setup trainers and a couple of very good doctors. And they have some very interesting cases. And she's amazing. Molly is spearheading this. She and my brother were working together very
Very
closely all
closely.
the time. So now I am the president of the Max Gerson Foundation.
And so the future of the foundation is really about providing Gerson care in China, or are there other locations that
No, but we have made a separate deal with HIT, and we also process patients who go
okay.
down to the clinic. Anna Maria is at the end of a telephone, so she'll help people on telephone, and she can process them and so on.
Okay.
So, and I give lectures there. Howard was doing it before, but he only managed to do one, and then he died.
Mm.
And yeah, I know, it's incredible. And so I said, okay, I'll do it, and I've done two so far, twice a month.
Okay.
I'll be doing talks and talking to the patients and so on. I really enjoy that. And they will be doing, I think, a home setup training program in LA. They're involved. I don't know if you saw the memorial service for my mother. Did you see that
I
in
did.
that wonderful Chinese church? Very large center there, and they may be doing a course in Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah, and they may be doing one in English. These are all projects that what we have.
All right. I have a couple of, we'll call it lightning round questions for you. Okay. What's your
Oh,
favorite go-to Gerson snack?
hmm. That's a good one.
It is a good one. I get that question all of the time.
Fruit, I guess, and depending on the season, a peach, a banana, an apricot, grapes, fruit.
What is your maybe favorite or best adjunctive therapy to recommend for a cancer patient? So they're doing Gerson protocol, and then would you say maybe hyperthermia? Would you say earthing? Would you say acupuncture? What would be your go-to adjunctive?
Okay, here you got to go easy because, for example, I have low blood pressure, so I can't do hyperthermia.
Yeah.
So hyperthermia, hyperbaric oxygen, and those things are not for everybody. You're asking about different kind of things. Hyperbaric oxygen probably can be good for some people. Hyperthermia probably can be good for some people in conjunction with Laetrile. Certain kinds of things, but not for everybody. Heart patients, low blood pressure, these sort of things. Ozone, definitely.
Yes.
Earthing for everybody.
Yes.
Okay, earthing is amazing. It is not a cure, but it's a wonderful adjunct for anybody. I think that I'm just, of course, I can't think of anything right.
That's okay. I knew I was going to do this to you.
Yeah,
I didn't want to give you
knew.
any preparation. I wanted the answers to be sort of pure.
I certainly think in many cases, an initial juice fast is a fantastic adjunct. A week, take a week off, do a juice fast, controlled by a doctor. Obviously, has to be, but it can be very effective.
Who's your inspiration? Who inspires you?
Who inspired my mother?
Yeah, I love that. Do you have any like heartwarming story that you want to share about Charlotte while we have a moment?
Oh, there are so
I
many.
know. I believe it.
I mean, Charlotte was when I would go, I would be visiting her, and I would go down to the clinic with her, and I would see the way she interacted with the patients and how they just adored her. And one day we just sat down afterwards, after lunch at the table, and somebody asked her, "Why does colon cancer so often metastasize to the liver?" And she says, "Well, do you know where the liver is?" I never.
Somewhere in this region.
Yeah, sort of like me. Well, it's right there next to the intestine, and it's the intestine. So we would go on like this, and I mean, it would be hilarious, the whole scene, because she would answer all questions with a question, of course, and trying to get them to think and so on. And this was one of the great memories that I had of her. Another one was when there was a man at the clinic, and he was sitting in a corner, and she was watching him. He had this plate of food, and he was pushing the food around with his fork,
Playing with it.
and she went over to him and she said, you got to eat that food. This is a nutritional therapy. if you don't eat, you're not doing a therapy. You're not doing anything.
That's right.
And you know what the end point of that is going to be. Okay. 2 weeks later, she went back down. He was still there,
Hmm.
and she saw this big plate of stuff, and he was mumbling something, muttering under his breath. So she went over closer, and he was saying, "Eat or die, eat or
Oh
die."
my gosh. Oh my goodness.
Well, if you're going to do it that way, okay.
I like to tell my patients often there is on the 4th of July in Coney Island, they do a Nathan's hot dog eating contest. And it is the most grotesque thing. If you look it up, if you see it on YouTube, it's disgusting.
Nathan, that
Nathan's
hot
hot dog
dog
eating
thing,
contest. And they
stick
shove
it out.
hot dogs with the
Oh my
buns
God,
in.
I've seen it.
But I tell my patients when they're saying, "Oh, I'm losing weight or I can't gain weight," I'm like, "You've got to pretend you're at Nathan's hot dog eating contest. Just get the food in. Maybe not so rushed. Don't cause yourself
That's right. Make sure you chew
but
it.
get it in." So I totally can empathize with that story. That gentleman, poor soul.
Another one of my favorite stories of hers was when she was making the rounds with Dr. Melendez.
Hmm.
And there were a couple of ones with them. One of them maybe is not quotable, but she went into this room, and there was this woman who had depression and had been on antidepressants for 20 years, and she was struggling and having terrible reactions, and tired, and all these drugs that she'd taken had damaged her. She didn't have cancer. So she was whining and complaining and so on. And when they left the room, my mother said to Dr. Melendez, she said, "Wow," she said, "give me a good melanoma anytime." And Dr. Melendez, who was an oncologist, her mouth dropped over. What, melanoma? I mean, she must be kidding. A few years later, she never forgot it. A few years later, they went into the room of a patient who had melanoma, and a large tumor under the arm, and a large tumor here and there, whatever. And this was about 2 weeks after she had come, and the tumor under the arm was half. The other one was completely, shrunk and almost flat, and so on. And the woman was happy, and she was just doing great, So they walked out of the room, and Dr. Melendez said, "Wow," she said, "give me a good melanoma any day." So there you are. There's a few little Charlotte stories, but there are hundreds of them, of course.
Yes, this has been wonderful.
They come up when the moment is right. They pop up into my mind.
I really hope that for you, and maybe for myself selfishly, that we're able to mend the communications with the Institute and with the Max Gerson Foundation. And
I think it would be possible because of course, Melania and I are great friends, and I was there at the clinic for a few days in April, I think, of 2017. And she and I get on really, really well. And when Howard died, she wrote me a very, very nice letter, and I think she said a really true thing. She said that she was not surprised that Howard didn't survive my mother by very long.
Mm.
She said there was such a symbiotic relationship between them, of mother and son. I don't know. It made me think, but anyway, whatever. But very, very kind and very feeling letter. And also Anita did. Anita wrote 2 letters, and she also I had a birthday GoFundMe for old dogs.
Well, nobody can pass up any GoFundMe for.
Well, I got. She made a nice contribution to that, so I noticed that. And,
That's very sweet.
Yeah, well, if they ask you, would you like to do a GoFundMe for your birthday? And there's all this list of things, and it's the Multiple Sclerosis Association, all that stuff that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot barge pole. But old dogs, yeah.
Yeah. a cause we can all get behind.
Right, right.